looking at some swing widgets. For some reason, that's the term that they give to these little things that you manipulate or see. We've seen some examples of that with buttons and menus. And today we're going to look at something called a combo box. All of these are things that you've encountered. And what we'll be showing is just how to implement these in Java. There are several pieces to it, as we'll see. So, combo box, a radio button, and a button group, those two work together. A checkbox and a text field. So we've seen a text area, which is a big, area, and a text field is just one line long. So we've seen examples of all of these. And in every case, there are several steps to these. One is instantiating one of these, instantiating. The second is putting it somewhere on the screen. And that's what this sort of layout stuff is about. And as we'll see, we kind of use the Russian nested doll idea to put it inside of other things, etc. And then the final step is to make it live, that is, make it do something. Out of the box, each of these will allow the user to manipulate them. So a button will let itself be clicked. The combo box, as we'll see, will drop down and let us select something. The radio buttons will let us click something and only allow us to click one at a time. The checkbox will let us check or uncheck, and the text field will let us write stuff, type stuff in it. But by themselves, though, they don't do anything. You need to actually put some code in to liven them up. The way that Swing does that is through listeners. Now we've been using action listeners. There are lots of different listeners. Actually, we've seen a second one, a window listener, which is something that happens whenever you manipulate the window, that is the J-frame. And just in general, whenever the approach that Java takes with this is that manipulating one of these widgets will fire some kind of event. Many times, many events. We've been dealing with the action events because, in my experience, the action events are the most flexible, generic, and just in general, one of the best ways to interact with this. However, there are some others. We're going to see an example of something called a focus listener with the text field. It's not currently in the program that I have, and we'll put it in. A second type of listener is a mouse listener, and maybe tomorrow we'll take a look at that. In other words, everything that you do with the mouse on the screen fires a mouse, some kind of mouse event. And again, in listening to that, you can choose what to do with it. So, okay, so let's get down to what we have here. So first, I'll show you what the thing looks like. And again, if you haven't already, if you could pull the code, pull my class code, you can either run it along, but I mean, it's all of this is in there right now. So here are the four different ones that I mentioned. This one at the top is what's called a combo box. And why is it called it, or drop down? Where did this come from?
Arnie, can Can you pull those boxes off to the side? Because whenever they pop up, it covers all the code.
Like this.
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Yeah, well, I just want to show you what it looks like, and then we'll go into the code. Actually, what I wanted to illustrate with this is using an enum. So I wrote an enum here based on something that my kids used to sing. So, you know, we have head, shoulders, knees, toes, eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Okay, so that's an enum. And the, oops. Let's try running, let's run it again here. Oops, okay. All right, so these are what populates this combo box. And and when you see something like this, in other words, when you see a little horizontal field and this little down and up arrow, such as, oh, like here's another example in NetBeans over here. Again, you click it and something comes up. So this is kind of the same thing. Again, the NetBeans one has a slightly different look to it, but that's just what they've done. So when you click on this, or actually if you click anywhere in here, it opens it up. And then what you can do is you can select one. So when we select one, the one that we've selected is going to show up in our little status down here. So notice that these values in the combo box exactly match what's in the body parts here, the enum. And as we'll see in the code, let's look at what the code is for that. Back up here. Okay, so here's where the combo box is defined. It's called a J combo box. Notice it's here. Unfortunately, Java has only partly done this, but they've gone part of the way, and that is it's done in a generic. So this body parts refers to the enum, and so what that will do is it will say I can only put instances of that enum in. So let's see where we initialize it here. So here we instantiate it. And what I've done here, and you can do much more complicated things, but if you remember, an enum has a static method called values that returns an array of all the different body parts. And so that is one of the ways that the constructor is overloaded. Okay, so you see, we can either create an empty one and add stuff later, or there's actually something a little more complicated called a combo box model. If we want to really customize this out the wazoo, we can use that for fancy stuff. Or, again, this is a little anachronistic. There's something called a vector, which is a pre-collections container that is, again, discouraged. So here we just put in an array, and then here I have a J panel, which is going to have everything in it. So this panel object has all this stuff in it. And to make it appear vertically like this, I changed the default layout to something called a grid layout. Now, a grid layout is going to lay things out as you would think in a grid. So the argument to the constructor for grid layout are the rows and the columns. The key thing here is actually the column. So notice that I said 0 rows and 1 column. So what's that about? That will constrain this to have 1 column. And the 0 rows is doesn't mean that there are going to be no rows. It just means that they're going to be unspecified. So whenever I keep adding things to it, it'll keep adding another row. Okay, so, and I add that to the north. So back to my combo box, I instantiate it with the array of all the different enum values, and I add it to the panel. Okay, so that's what I like about this, is that if you define an enum, then I don't have to explicitly put each of these in. I can just put in whatever the ones of the enum have, and they will go in. So that's laziness, and yet it's robust in that if somehow the enum were to be updated and have more items or fewer items, then this would correspondingly be updated. Okay, so now what behavior did I want? What I wanted is I wanted the behavior to be whenever I selected one, that it would be basically which one I selected would be displayed in our little J label, as we've done before. That J label is where did I put that? Down here, sort of a status label, just a J label, and I added it to the south. So what makes it do that is a combo box listener. And here, because I wasn't reusing this, I just kind of put it in here. It probably would have been probably a better style to do this. This is kind of my, okay. Now let's see what that's about, because for this I wanted to whenever the combo box listener threw an action event, I wanted to update the status label, and here's how I did it. I set the text of the status label to, the body part, and then here for the combo box, I can get the selected item. Should we get select, where is it? Get selected item. Notice that there are a ton of these. Okay, get selected item. And here's where I think they kind of screwed up, because this should have, because it's defined as a generic, this should have been a generic, or they should have figured out a way to do that. They didn't. It's just an object, but the object that returns is in fact one of those enums. Okay. So again, when I click on choose my different value in the combo box, it fires an action event. That action event is heard by this combo box listener, which executes the action performed method. And all it does is it changes the status label. And just in general, whenever you're listening as an action listener or any other kind of listener, it will invoke a method. That method will typically have as its argument that event, and we're going to use that event in for one of the other ones. And whatever you want to do here, this is where you actually make the response to the widget do something. Okay, so that's the combo box. Now in the next panel here, notice that there are clubs, hearts, diamonds, spades. That should sound a little bit familiar. And what that is if you remember a while back, we defined an enum called suit that had the different ones in it. And so I decided to use that as well. Now, if we look at this, this is what's called a radio button. And why, does anybody know why it's called a radio button? This is another anachronism. It's like, you've all heard the term, when you call someone, you dial them, but there's no dial on anybody's phone anymore. Now you'll probably have to ask your grandparents about this, but in the old days, in car radios, they had these buttons that you could preset the station to. And when you pressed one button in, the other button that was pressed would pop out. So you could only press one button at a time. That's why these are called radio buttons, because I can only select one. And when I select one, regardless of which one it is, any other one that's selected is going to be unselected. And my status label is going to reflect which one is selected. Okay, now here's, so now how do you maintain the fact that only one of these is going to be selected? That's what the button group is. So a button group, all the radio buttons in a button group have the constraint that only one can be selected at a time. So every radio button in the button group has this constraint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the array of, I'm going to create an array of these guys, and that I'm going to get that array from the values of the suit. So here's my enum, the suit. I'm going to get the values and get the length of that. So again, I'm writing this in a generic way. I'm not hard coding the fact that there are 4 suits in there. I'm using the, however many they have. Okay, I'm going to put these in a separate panel. So you notice, in fact, if you look closely, you can see that there's like a little etched border around it. I think it was a border, yeah. So that's just to make it clear where that is. That's how I create another J panel to hold this. And again, it's going to be a grid layout. Now I'm going to allow 2 columns. That's why these are laid out as 2 columns like that. See this little etched border, the J panel, I can set the border. And the way I do that is there's a thing called the border factory, and it has a bazillion different kinds of borders that I can create. Again, it's just a little bit of eye candy. The main thing here is to make sure that I just want to make sure that this piece of it is distinguished. If I don't put a border on, it's all going to blend together. Okay, so then I add my radio button panel to my main panel, which is this guy here. Okay, so that I'm going to have a radio button listener. That's going to be my action listener. We'll get to that in a second. But now I want to set this up. So I have to do a little bit more work than with the combo box. So first, what I'm going to instantiate each radio button separately. I have to do that. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the values of the suit, and because I need a string, I can't put an enum in. I just need to get the ith value of the suit array, and then to-string it to turn into a string so I can pass it to the constructor of the radio button. Then I add it to the button group, and then I add the action listener here. And then finally, I add it to the radio button panel. See, this button group is not visual, but it's something, it's non-visual, but the button group is what controls the fact that only one of these can be selected. Okay, so now what's different about this radio button listener is that it uses information from the action command. So far we haven't done that, but there's actually a lot of information that comes from the action command in terms of that. So one of those is something called the action command. So if the action event has been fired from an abstract button, as we saw in the class hierarchy, then the action command is typically set to what the text of that is. So the text of the radio button is the name of the enum that it was instantiated with. And so the action command that's passed here is what that is. And we see that here. So if I click on one of these guys, then it's shown down here. And likewise here. Again, how was that done? Because when the action event was fired from, say, the spades radio button, the name, the action command is the text that was in. That's kind of the default. That can be overridden with a little extra coding, but typically you don't want to do that. Okay, so that's the radio button. Okay, the next one is our checkboxes. Now with checkboxes, the difference between a checkbox and a radio button is that with checkboxes we can have as many or as few as we want. So even though these are all grouped together, I can sort of pick and choose which ones I want to have selected. Now notice that when I click on one, okay, so I clicked on checkbox 2, it said checkbox 2 is selected. And then when I change it to unselected, now this says checkbox 2 is not selected. So the message that I'm sending reflects the state of that. And again, that's what that's basically what I want, that behavior. In other words, I want to be able to reflect whether that was clicked or not. So let's see how we do that. Again, I'm going to put all these in a panel. And again, I'm going to lay it out with 2 columns. Let's see, 2 columns, yeah. Yeah, just to show that 2 is not hard-coded anywhere. Let's make it 3. What would happen if we have 3? Okay, so I made it 3, and now notice that they're laid out with 3 columns. So how did I, and here I created it's hard to exactly see. I created what's called a beveled border that's raised. So it kind of, if you look carefully, it looks like it's kind of popping out just a little bit. Okay, so here I instantiate the checkbox listener that will show what that is in a second. So in this case, I decided to just hardwire in the fact that I wanted 6 of these, and what I'm going to be putting in is just the number. I mean, I could put anything in there. In the course of doing this, again, I want to put the number in. And so one way to turn an int into a string is this static method called integer.toString. I give it an integer and it returns the string corresponding to that. So again, in untyped languages, this would be less of a deal. In a strongly typed language, see, I can't just put an int in. It says no suitable constructor for an int. It needs to be a string. Okay, so I add it to the panel, and then you can kind of see what happens as we add it. For a grid layout, as I've done here, it gets added all across the row, and then when it runs out of columns, it goes to the next row. So even though I've said 0 rows, as I keep adding things in, it'll keep adding more rows. So that's very convenient. And so if I'm trying to lay something out in a way, you know, almost like a table type of thing, if I specify how many columns, then using a grid layout will just let me do that and just sort of lay them out automatically like that. Okay, so J checkbox is the name of the class. So I instantiate it, I add it to the panel, and then for each one of these, I'm going to have the action listener listen for it. Okay, and that's necessary because just as it was for the radio buttons, each radio button was doing that. Why? Because it's the buttons, the radio button and the checkbox themselves that fire the action event. A J panel does not. A J panel doesn't fire action events. Only these widgets fire an action event. And a panel is not a widget. It's a container for putting these in. Okay, so let's see what this listener guy is about. Okay, so notice that again, the message for this said whether it was selected or not selected. Okay, so I want to be able to do that. So I have to do a little bit more. So again, from the action event, one of its instance variables is a reference to its source. That is, which component fired that action event. So in this case, it would be one of these checkboxes. Okay, but the problem is that if we look at get source, we see that its return is just an object. Okay, so that's the most generic thing possible. If they were, I think they could have done it a little bit better, but they didn't. So this is how we, because it actually is or could be a checkbox, this is how we check it. I say if the source is an instance of J checkbox, and notice instance of, all one word, says if that object that fired this action event is in fact a checkbox, then I can safely cast it to a J checkbox. See, otherwise I can't. If it's a radio button or just a J button or a menu item, then I can't do that. But now, okay, so I was a bit lazy here. So here's the action command. Okay, say that will be, in this case, the number of the thing that I've clicked, because the action command is going to be the text of what that says. And then to decide whether it was selected, it turns out that the J checkbox has a method called isSelected, which does what you would think it does. So isSelected, Boolean true, it returns true if the toggle button is selected, otherwise false. So, and then I'm using this, you should be, if you recall this syntax, I have a Boolean expression here, question mark. So if it's true, then this, and if it's false, it's this string. So that is how, when I click on one of them, so in this case, it is true because it's selected. And if I click it again, it is false because it's not selected. Okay, so a couple things going on here. Okay, one is how to safely cast. If you want to safely cast an object from one class to another, first of all, it has to be there has to be sort of a fighting chance for it. In this case, this is an object, and so an object can be, an instance of object can be almost anything. So here, if this is a checkbox, it's true. If it's not a checkbox, then forget it. If this is true, then I can safely do this cast. So whenever you're doing a cast like this, you should always check to make sure that it can be safely done. Okay, so that's the checkbox. And the final widget we're going to look at is in this one. So this is a text field. And typically, what's a text field for? A text field is where you enter something, and it's going to be in just one line. So even if I hit return and stuff, nothing happens. So unlike a text area that can have multiple lines, a text field only has one line. And we've seen some examples of that. So for example, if I, what was an example of that? So if I want to create a new file, let's say a new Java class somewhere. So here's a text field, and here's another text field. Here's a combo box. Here's another text field. Okay, so the J text field is something which appears in lots of places. Okay, now and typically now I can I can set it so that I can set editable to be false if I want, but there would be no point to that. The whole point of a text field is that you're asking for input from the user. So, okay, so what I want is for this particular one, the instruction is enter some text and click OK. So here's OK. And then what I have down here is I have what is entered. Okay, so that tells me what I've entered. So that's the behavior that I want. Again, what do you use this for in an application? In a situation where you want the user to type in something, then why are they typing it in? Well, you want to do something with it. So how do you do something with it? Well, there are a number of, there are actually some events that the text field does fire, but you will typically need something like a button or whatever. Notice in this particular case, and I won't get into it, but many times we want to also allow the user to say hit enter and have that do something. I haven't done that here. We'll maybe look at that tomorrow. But again, and as with the text area, this has some capabilities that just sort of built in. So for example, and you can't see I'm doing this, if I'm hitting Command X, or if I was on Windows, it would be Control X, and that cut the text and put it into the clipboard. And now if I hit on a Mac, it's Command V. On a Windows, it would be Control V. Control V, I put it back in. So the keyboard shortcuts that you commonly associate with manipulating text, cut, copy, paste, all of that is available just for free. Okay, so now how do we do that with the text field? So here again, I put this in another J panel, and now here I want a grid layout of 2 because, okay, in this particular case, I want one column to be the text field and the other column to be the button. There are fancier ways of laying this out so that it's not so spread out, but I'm not gonna worry about that for now. And then this is just gonna be a J label, and then the final grid here is just empty. So, but that's okay. Okay, so again, panel, grid, here I want 2 columns, and then here I add it to the main panel. Here I'm going to create another raised bevel border just so you can C, make sure that the panel is clearly delimited. Okay, so here's where I instantiate the text field. And again, what I can do is I can put in some text there if I want. In fact, what I could have done is something like, if I do that, here, let's, so if I put that, then that text is entered there. But okay, so I actually don't want that. Come on. And as you've noticed, I've already set up this little window listener thing so that you confirm with the user that you want to exit. Okay, take it. Okay, so now, so basically, here's what happened. If I just put the button in here, so this is how the grid layout works. What the grid layout will do is it will take anything you put in and it will stretch it out to fill the whole column. We can see that as I, like if I stretch this out this way, notice that the text field stretches out to accommodate that. But if I put the button in, then the button will do the same thing. The button just would fill the whole shebang here. I didn't want that. And so what I did was I created a new J panel with a button panel using its default layout, which is something called a flow layout. And what the flow layout does is it preserves the desired size of the widget I put in. So in this case, the basic size of the button is dictated by how much text is in there plus a little bit on the sides. Okay, so I put that button panel into the text field panel. So again, that's another layer of the Russian nested dolls. And then I put the button into that panel. So right here, so I got the button, that's inside a panel here, which is inside a panel here, which is inside this whole panel. So again, it's things inside of other things. And the way that I make it live is through this text field listener, okay, which I add to the button. So let's look at what that does. And basically all that does is it updates the status label from, it says from the text field, I want to get the text. So when I hit OK, the text field listener comes in or gets triggered through the action event, and then you know what was entered is this is a test. Okay, I want to do one more tweak on this just to show you another thing with the text field, and that is what you may have noticed if you've used a web browser anytime in the past day or so. You'll notice that in a web browser, whenever you click in the address piece of it, it will select the entire thing. So how can I do that here? I can do that with the text field through something called a focus listener. And what focus is focus has to do with which thing has the quote focus. So if you look very carefully, you will see that there's a little blue line around this. That means that this field has the focus. If I click somewhere else, and in fact, if you look very carefully, you'll see that this checkbox now has the focus because there's actually a little blue thing around it. Likewise here, if you look carefully, there's a little blue guy around that. And even if I click on this, see, I click on the button, the blue border says this has the focus. So what I want is when I click on here, I want all of that text to be selected. And I do that with a focus listener. So I'll write a focus listener. Okay, so there's an interface called focus listener. And again, we implement all abstract methods. Now in this particular listener, there are two methods. We've seen many other listeners have only one. The window listener has a whole bunch. But here, okay, so here there are two: focus gained and focus lost. They do what you would think. That is, when I click in to the field, in this case, it will gain the focus. And when I click somewhere else, it loses the focus. Okay, so I don't want to do anything when I lose the focus. But when I gain the focus, okay, so here, when I gain the focus, I have a method called okay, what the heck is it called? It is, thought it was select. Yeah, select all. It was in there somewhere. What are you complaining? Never used. Okay. So when I gain focus, I select all. Now I can either do it this way, or I can do it another way, using something similar to the other. Say if the source is an instance of J text field, then I'll do it in two. I can cast my source to the selected field, not filed, field, and then selected field, select all. Okay, either one. Actually, this is a little more generic. So now how do I hook that up? What did I call it? Text focused listener. For some reason I always hit the S instead of the E. And then I add a focus listener to it, so that now when I run it, let's see, hopefully this works. Okay, so okay, and then now when I just clicked in here and then it selected everything. Again, how did it do that? It did that by, in this case, I had my choice, because text field was an instance variable. I could do it directly, or actually more generically do it this way. The advantage of doing it this way is that this will work for if I have other text fields in there and this is the same behavior that I want for all of them, then this will work if I have multiple ones. So again, I'm saying, okay, if you're a text field, then I'm going to cast the source of this, that is who fired it, to a text field, and then just say select all, which is going to select them all. Okay, so those are just some of the little widgets that we have. There are a few more things that I'm going to show you. We could spend probably the whole quarter just on issues of involving graphical user interfaces. There's a ton of stuff involved with this. There's a ton of stuff involved with making sure that the user experience is something which is not horrible. Going from things like the fact that we confirmed from the user if they wanted to exit. Again, that can sometimes be annoying, but every now and then it's something that saves your keister. Again, if you do an hour of editing on a Word document and then accidentally close it without, and the application doesn't give you a chance, that's very bad behavior. That was one example of that. The other is that through experience over many years with these kinds of interfaces, you have all come to expect that certain things have work in certain ways. If you see a text box, a text area field, for example, you expect to be able to click into it and type some stuff. And maybe have to click a button, as I've done here. Most of the time, you also want to be able to hit enter. Now, we haven't done that here. That's something we're going to talk about tomorrow, about how to handle things like key events. If you see these radio buttons, again, you've come to expect that you can select one and only one of those. And you don't need any special training on that because you've experienced that in applications that you've been running for a long time. Then you just know that's how it works. And likewise with the check boxes. I see a little square check boxes, and I see, even if I see a bunch of them, I know that I can either click on one or not click on one, and it will, I can select as few or as many as I want. If I see a button, I know I can click it and something is going to happen. Okay, so these are all, the advantage of this is in a way, before this became a common thing, you would have to have special training on just what these things did because people didn't know. When I first started teaching here, back when dinosaurs ruled the world, again, students like yourself would come in and they'd never seen anything like this before. At most, they'd maybe run DOS computers, which were just pure text and nothing else. So you need to do a lot of work to sort of learn how to do this. You're all way beyond that, and that's a good thing.